What's up, everyone, and thanks for watching. Actually, in here in the garage working on a 2001 Dyna Wide Glide Twin Cam 88. We are doing a carb swap on this bike, and also you're going to have some other videos uploaded where we're doing just a complete frame up cleaning on this bike. It has been sitting for, gosh, maybe I think 5 to 7 years. But another video to come on that. But for this video, we're going to be looking at the actual carburetor. So you know, I, I've rejetted plenty of these before. They're really easy to do. There's a lot of videos. There's a lot of kits out there. The internet's absolutely flooded with info on them. They're not hard to do. But since this bike has been sitting, we would have to go in and replace all the O-rings, gaskets, and even the vacuum slide, in my opinion, needs to be replaced. It's just so old and been sitting. So we're going to do a swap. Now, I know a lot of folks they'll either just get another brand new CV, they'll get a Mikuni or SNS, all popular, great options. Don't want to get into the arguments as to what's better. But the route we're going is with a guy in California that on eBay, he'll either do a complete core swap or just a complete CV carb. And I'm telling you, they are phenomenal. I've used one on a 97 Evo Softail. And by the way, I am an Evo guy. This is a twin cam, but these bikes are still pretty good. But for the value for what you get, they're great. I will put a link in the bottom so you folks can see it. You can go check out his auctions and decide for yourself. But we're just going to pull this thing off. This first video will be about just pulling the carb itself. I'm not going to get into all the little nitty gritty details, but just to kind of show you the kind of the outcome. We'll follow up with another video showing the new carb as a side by side, and then also the bike running. But anyway, I am going to shut up for now. We're going to get into it and start pulling this off, and just kind of update you as we go. All right, so stopping for a moment on removing this, just to kind of explain a few things here. Now that we've got the breather and the back plate off, of course, what I just went through is basically how you would replace this air filter. And you can see he's just got just a stock filter, nothing else on it, stock cleaner. And these can be upgraded if you want more of an open element. But on here, what we have left is you can see the carburetor just kind of hanging. That makes sense. So this is where the fuel line comes in. Pretty basic. Remove it, pop it out. Be careful with it. You don't want to split anything or hurt anything like that. Obviously, get the rag or cup or something underneath it. You will have some fuel that comes out. And of course, make sure your petcock is turned off, and we'll get over there in just a second to show. But another thing too is usually one of the biggest pains in the butts in these things is getting these out. You can see I'm barely twisting the throttle cable up here just to kind of show. You've got to remove both of these cables. What you want to do, don't sit here and fight them. Come up here on the handlebars. This one's already been pulled back. You want to loosen these both up all the way just to give it slack. Once you do that, you're going to pop these little, I guess you just call them these little, I don't know what you want to call them, these tabs or whatever that go in here for these cables. They're pretty self-explanatory. Pop those out. They only go in one way, so you're not going to accidentally get the wrong one in the wrong side, blah, 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 when you go to redo it. Okay? And then over here on the other side, walk around here for a second. On this side, obviously, if you're riding the bike, you know what the petcock or the fuel valve is. Make sure it's off. That's it. Just make sure it's off. That's all. And then here on the choke cable, it's very important here. These are really easy to remove. One thing to note, this adjuster right here is plastic. The nut behind it is plastic. Don't put a wrench on them. Don't put pliers on them. If you do put pliers or wrench on them, be very careful. I've snapped these before. Now, if you snap one, you just replace the whole clutch cable or choke cable, excuse me. It's real easy. But you can see this is on the bike and it's working, right? If you loosen this just a little, watch this go in. See, that's all it is. You don't want to crank this, okay? All I'm going to do is just loosen that adjuster, loosen the nut behind it by hand. That's how it was. Pops right out. That's done. Another thing, this is an '01 model bike. This has a vacuum operated petcock. A lot of guys and gals don't know that these are operated by vacuum. So in other words, on this bike, in theory, if it's working, you can turn this on, and as long as that bike is not cranking and not running, no fuel is going to flow from this tank to that carburetor. Now, you can thank government, EPA, whomever that did that. I'm assuming that's where the hands were that were in that. But what that means is that if this carburetor, if this bike, excuse me, is sitting in the garage forever, it's been sitting for a month, and you're going to go out and ride it. Let's say that all the gas in the bottom, back around here, all the gas that was in this bowl, if it's now gone, you can crank on this throttle all day long, and you ain't going to get any gas shooting into those cylinders. So what that means is that the motor has to be cranking to start getting fuel. You can't just give it a few pumps, if that makes sense. You can get aftermarket ones to do that, to where you bypass it. Also, there are ways to bypass the factory. If anybody's interested in the comments, I might do a video on that. There are ways to bypass the factory. When I did that on an older bike of mine. So, what else? Oh, one more thing. This sits in a rubber gasket. So there's a rubber gasket that goes around the intake manifold. So this carburetor does not bolt in this bike. See it moving? These are the only bolts up here on the head for the vents. This carburetor will just pop right out. There's no bolts. Inspect your gasket, make sure it looks good. If it's dry rotted, torn, ripped, or if it looks funky, just replace it. They're pretty cheap. But that's about it, folks. So we're gonna get this thing off, and we'll do a quick update when we're done with that. Okay, so we got the carburetor off, obviously, here. So you probably saw me fighting with both the cables over here. If I can get this on camera so you fine folks can actually see it. You can see where the cables fit into this housing here, and then they just connect down here. Pretty self-explanatory, but you do have to fight it a little bit, but it's not that difficult. And then the same with taking the fuel line off. Now, a few things on this carb to note. This carb somebody's been in it before, and that's pretty common on these bikes, not uncommon. A few things. Number one, the bowl on the bottom, you can see that these are Allen head screws. From the factory, Harley puts, or whoever makes these, I don't know if Harley makes them or somebody makes them for them. And correct me if you want to in the comments, don't care. But they usually use these Phillips. And as you know, Phillips heads can waller out. You can see them here on the top, right, where the diaphragm and the slide is in the top. Now, we are not rebuilding this carburetor. We are simply going to replace it with something else because of how old it is. Can we rebuild it? Yeah, I've done plenty of them. But you're probably going to end up spending, by the time you spend money on a jet kit, rebuild kit, and potentially replacing this slide that's in here, right? There's a diaphragm up under here. So, and anybody that's taken these apart knows that this diaphragm is a lot of fun, but it's not difficult. It's just tedious. The money we would pay to rebuild this car, in my opinion, is not worth it if there's an option. We spent, by the time this goes in as a core exchange, you're going to spend about $238. That's not bad for not only a car that's custom, but the way it's just, I'll show everybody when we get it. We'll just do a side-by-side comparison. One other thing to note is normally these have a plastic elbow here for the fuel. This one I do believe was replaced, unless they started putting brass ones on later on the twin cams, but I don't think they did. But as you can imagine, if this is plastic, you over tighten it, it can crack. So the one that we will be getting will have a brass one just like this. These screws will be Allen heads, and these screws will be Allen heads, which is nice, which is great. One thing we do have to do is we have to take this choke cable off. I already loosened this. It's a 9/16. This is another plastic. What I do, once you loosen it, is you just start, don't fight it, just start twisting it like this. If I can do this and keep it on camera, goodness gracious. And all we're going to do is pop this sucker out. And we're going to reuse it for the next carburetor when we get it. Actually, I should probably just do it like that. Here it is. See, popped out. There's the choke cable. It literally goes down in there. Also, a few more things on these. If you notice, one thing I forgot to mention, right here is a vacuum line. This vacuum line, you saw me, I had to disconnect it when I was pulling the carb out. This vacuum line is what controls that vacuum operated petcock that I was talking about. If you bypass that petcock, the vacuum, all you need is just some kind of piece of plastic or rubber, probably. I did this on the last bike. Just cover it up. That way that this is covered up and you don't have that vacuum coming. And then you do the same on the other. It's just a bypass. That could be a different video for a different day. And, oh, one more thing. On the older bikes, right here was a drain. So I had to take this one. I'm not going to show everything on camera. This one we had to actually pull the bowl off to get the gas out, which is silly. So government, EPA, or big business that thought it was a good idea to get rid of this, they think it's cutesy because you won't have gas come out of this possibly. But to drain the bowl, you have to pull the bowl, which is an absolute mess. So kudos to whoever came up with that brainchild idea. And the last thing we're going to talk about on this car before we get the new one is just, this is the rubber intake gasket. These literally just slip on the intake. They slip on the intake, and then the carburetor itself just slides on it. Super easy setup, easy to do. I have reused these multiple times over the years on different bikes, pulling them off to rejet them, pulling them off to clean them. You can normally reuse them. This bike, however, has sat so long, we're just going to go ahead and, as a precaution, just pull it off and replace it. It's cheap insurance, so it's not a big deal there. Once we get the new carb in, we will do a side-by-side video showing the difference in the carbs themselves, and of course get it on the bike itself. But if you can, please stay tuned, subscribe, so forth, and we'll get that next video out and show you guys, number one, getting the carb on, and also showing the bike running.